Alright everyone, now it's time for the follow-up, of course, to the breaking short that I did the other day. Of course, a couple of drones were fired on just outside of the Kremlin in Moscow. Immediately, the blame game began, and that blame game will continue. Russia is going to continue to claim because it's diplomatically important to do so, it's strategically intelligent to do so. It just makes sense. They're going to continue to blame Kiev for the drones that attempted to attack the Kremlin. And they were blown up. I think one of them actually blew up on its own, causing shrapnel basically to plunk on the roof. The other one was fired upon, it appears. And then Kiev has countered by saying, no, it's not our drone. I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. This is a false flag probably. And that's what a lot of people are going with. Well, Putin designed this as a Reichstag fire moment, because then he can get more support for his war in Ukraine. If the people of Russia think that they're under attack, it's easier for domestic things to be quelled because you get a sense of patriotism. Well, we were attacked on our own soil, and the whole nine yards. Now, much like with Nord Stream, where we're pretty sure about who done it, but we're still not 100% sure. Again, I doubt it was Russia that did it in that case because it made absolutely no sense, that particular talking point. And then the Germans, who aren't exactly friendly towards Moscow, sending fucking tanks to Ukraine, by the way, they determined there was no evidence that Russia did it. So Nord Stream is a little bit of a different story. And of course, the Nord Stream pipelines being blown, considerably more important, despite the fact that this is the Kremlin that was ostensibly attacked. They were a couple of relatively slow and small drones that didn't really do any meaningful damage. Again, there's probably a couple tiles broke off of the roof. That's the sum and substance of it. Now, I'm going to use the same analysis for what just happened with the Kremlin drone strikes. First, you're going to get competing theories. You're going to get a bunch of people in legacy media and some independent content creators with an axe to grind, whether they be gung-ho for Ukraine or gung-ho for Russia. That doesn't really matter. It's more like the East-West bloc thing. They're all going to claim some sort of gnosis. I claim objectively, I just know, I feel it in my bones. Just like all the ladies that called up to talk shows around 2002 saying, another 9/11 is going to happen soon. I can just feel it. I know that it's coming because it's the way people operate. They will claim some sort of knowledge, some sort of gnosis that Ukraine or Russia was responsible, or the CIA, or some terrorist group, or some guerrilla movement. They'll make a claim that they know. In most cases, it's more like a guess, and they're hoping that eventually you have evidence that they're right. And even otherwise, you're probably never going to get full evidence of who done it regardless, and it's an echo chamber audience, so it sort of makes sense to just pitch it in and just go with it. Here's my thought. We're unlikely to ever know specifically who is directly involved. This happened deep in Russian territory, so unless somebody takes credit for having done it, Ukraine's not going to own up to it if it was them, and if Russia itself conducted it, which would be a second major possibility, again as a Reichstag fire false flag, they're not going to own up to it either, and nobody else is going to have any evidence because it's in Russian territory. So we probably will never know. It'll be in limbo forever. What would be the kicker is if there were some sort of tracking of where they took off from, probably from within Russia itself, which doesn't nullify the idea that it could have been a Ukrainian strike, by the way. That would be number one. Secondly, there's the socio-political aspect. How does this affect the ongoing war in Ukraine? Probably not much, I would think. Assuming that this was a Ukrainian strike at all, if it had caused casualties, that could be a problem. If Russia itself did this in order to just, say, hey, look at the Ukrainians, they're attacking us on our own soil, you're not going to change any West, like pro-Western minds, because they're like, well, yeah, but you're in Ukraine attacking Ukrainian territory, so who cares? I've already seen that, by the way, so it doesn't change their mind. The only thing I can think of is Ukraine did want to attack the Kremlin, basically to show the Russians we can, and it seems to have been a failure if that's the case, because again, there wasn't any real meaningful damage. And if Russia did it, it was almost certainly to drum up support for continuing the war. They're expecting the Ukrainians potentially to mount an offensive operation, and if Russia loses, which is possible, although not likely, I think Putin wants to bolster people. And basically, Ukraine has attacked us on our own soil, and now they're moving closer to our soil. So be afraid and join up the war effort, basically. Basically for recruiting people and for making sure the domestic population doesn't start protesting at some point as the war drags on and on. We've got to understand another thing with regards to the Ukraine war. Russia wants to consolidate its control over the areas that it has already declared it intends to absorb and or turn into a puppet state. That's what it wants. At some point you have to fully do so, though, because much like with the United States, initially the population was gung-ho for invading Iraq and Afghanistan. Within a few years, people start to get weary of it. And the Russian population has been castigated as a bunch of hyper-nationalists, and they're all on board with Putin. They love him so much. They want to butcher all the Ukrainians. It's sort of a one-dimensionality. It's really a stereotype, and people that post this online aren't banned for it, even though they use like literal racial epithets and caricatures of them that would be kind of similar to propaganda from other eras in history that people would generally love to forget. It's very funny. The insinuation is that these Russians are single-minded drunks that love guns and love to hate on the Western world, and they want to destroy civilization and rebuild the Soviet Union, and so they will never change their minds. That's not the way that things work. The average Russian just wants to be left alone, just like the average American, etc., etc. When you have something like this happening, you get an initial surge in support, and then it begins to dwindle over time, which is probably already happening. Again, I'm not going to trust Western media or East Bloc media when it comes to polling Russian people on whether they support war. Hell, our own polls of our own populations half the time are bullshit. The latest polling about gun control showing the vast majority of Americans want to ban assault weapons. No, I don't believe your poll. The fact that it was conducted by a latent Fox News that decided to purge the one populist left on its platform while deciding to brick wall Trump, yeah, that's rather telling, the timing there. Polling doesn't matter. Here's my advice. Don't listen to any polling on the subject. Don't speculate about who done it, because you probably will never know. And don't trust anyone claiming some sort of inside knowledge, because they're probably full of fucking bullshit. The fog of war has already enshrouded the incident. If it becomes inconvenient for whoever did it, it'll just be forgotten anyway. So it's almost meaningless. What could happen is you get a further strike. Maybe the next drone strike actually does manage to take out a dignitary or something. That would be more significant. Until something actually causes casualties, though, it's not clear that it's going to have a major change on the overall trajectory of the war, other than it appears to be potentially a Russian operation to bolster support domestically, and potentially a Ukrainian operation to shock the Russians. Hey, look, we got drones capable of blowing themselves up right into your capital and blew them up right over the capital. If we can do this, Putin's not necessarily safe within 500 miles of the Ukrainian border, which becomes a logistical problem. Hey, we can fly a drone in under radar and drop nanothermite all over the nuclear weapons. Well, yeah, I guess Ukraine would be making a point. Drones have begun to be used in a much more meaningful and impactful manner in modern warfare. It's no longer, hey, the drone with a missile flying up above targeting a specific tank or a specific structure or something, and a state actor is required to have considerable resources to obtain the drone, obtain the rocket, etc. Now it's smaller end drones that are within the purchasing capability of non-state actors quite easily, can be strapped with explosives and go be blown up next to or on top of an object or a place or a person, and there's not a huge countermeasure available to defend against this. So we'll see what happens. I'll eagerly await more updates, but I suspect it'll continue to be he said, she said. Putin says that Zelensky did it. Zelensky says Putin probably did it. People will blame the CIA. People will blame Chechen guerrillas, and in the end, nobody knows what the fuck they're talking about. That's about all. Peace out.